My name is Rhys Lindmark, aka @Rhys Lindmark, my Twitter handle. And this is blockchain ethics. And I'm from the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. And yeah, it's gonna be 20-25 minutes to chat about blockchain ethics. But before I do that, because we have a small crew, I just wanna ask people what your name is and why you came to this talk. So let's start over here.
Sure. My name's RJ Herrick, and long ago I studied philosophy, and I am still deeply interested in morality and ethics. I've been attending Yale's working group on technology and ethics for the last couple of years, so a lot of discussion around emerging technologies and how that impacts our history of human experience that we use to build our ethical knowledge base out of. So obviously, very short timeline here, not a lot built up, so we're having a lot of new experiences and figuring out what the ethics is around here. So I'd love to have the conversation.
Perfect, that sounds great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Saifuddin Mohammed. I'm from Cambridge State University, second year PhD student in robotics.
In what, sir?
Robotics.
Robotics, cool.
Yeah, and one of the guy of our lab, he is very experienced in this field, so he told me just to go and attend this seminar. Really enjoy it.
Nice. Videotape it, hello, and you can send it to him later. That sounds good. Okay.
And thanks for letting us do this. This is fun. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm from Detroit. I'm CTO of blockchain startup eth.boston, we're a decentralized exchange, and EVO, which is a decentralized trading app, EVO. And I'm particularly interested in this just because of how blockchain is applicable to so many different aspects, and the ethical considerations around it I think are really fascinating. And I'm really just excited to hear what you're going to share.
Sweet, thank you.
And I'm also Elizabeth.
It's Elizabeth.
How does it happen, right? And I did, like you, studied psychology and philosophy and ethics, and have just always kept up with it. Many moons ago, I was an RN, and medical ethics was something I was very involved in. So it's fascinating to watch, how it's coming to evolve here at the blockchain. So.
Oh yes, I think, as you all noted, we are something like blockchain ethics. We're at just the beginning of this. It's actually kind of funny because whenever you say to folks, "Oh, I'm going to do a thing on blockchain ethics" or whatever, most people's response is like, kind of a hilarious, like, "Oh, haha, you mean lack of ethics," or things like that, which I think is a sign that we need more ethics. I guess another note here is, at the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT, I just started teaching a class on blockchain ethics this semester, and as far as I know, it's the first blockchain ethics class that has existed. So I'll give it a little overview on what that looks like, how you can is anybody here actually hacking, by the way? You are, okay, sweet. So we'll do a little bit on how you can apply it to hacking, but more macro, how it looks in the movement. So let's see if this thing can actually work. Is there a clicker, or were people just clicking it on their computer? Interesting.
I might have one if you want to borrow one.
I think that the hope is that it would, I'll be able to use this if necessary.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Sweet. So yeah, talking about what is blockchain ethics, some specific examples of it, how you can use it while you hack, and then this other piece about how blockchain ethics connects to abundance more generally. So with that said, what is blockchain ethics and why is it important? So blockchain ethics is a field and a community of people focused on answering the question, how can we positively shape the development of blockchain technology? Pretty much what you would expect, a group of people aligned around positively shaping technology. And you can think of it, I kind of think of it like you have something like the state, like nation-state governments and things like the SEC or the CFTC and things like that are regulating blockchain cryptocurrency technology. And on the other side, you have companies, and I just like copy-pasted this from the website, of various folks who are trying to do what companies do, which is increase shareholder returns and things like that. It's a little bit more confusing in the blockchain ecosystem because of tokenomics and like open source protocols and things, but generally you have the state, you have companies, and then you have what people often call like civil society or like the third space. And that's where blockchain ethics falls. It's with nonprofits, it's with universities, and things of that variety. So, and why we need it is because you have in any case, you're going to have, if you have any technology, you're going to have the tech ethics, like you were referencing earlier for any field. When nuclear technology came out, we started to be like, ooh, let's have nuclear security. Let's make sure we don't blow ourselves up. With AI, we have AI ethics. With biotech, we have biotech ethics. And so with blockchain, we will have blockchain ethics as a full-featured field. We're just not quite there yet. Let me say also a note here, which is this is especially true for blockchain and cryptocurrency technology because in addition to it being tech, tech in and of itself, it's also money. And so that makes it even more needed from a tech perspective. So as I said earlier, why is it important? This is just an indication that we have no tech ethics right now. Or no blockchain ethics. Whenever I talk about it, people are like, haha, that's hilarious. And so the way I really think about it is, although we're at the beginning stages here, if blockchain technology has even 10% of the internet's impact, we should take great care in developing it. That's the crucial idea. It's tough to tell how impactful this technology is going to be, but I think a lot of us here believe that it could be surprisingly impactful, and if it is, let's proactively think about how it impacts society. So you can see these examples that people are starting to think of, whether it's things like Bitcoin and how it's used in darknet markets or with pseudonymous trading and things like that. Something like Libra, I think, was a big wake-up call for a lot of people around tech, around blockchain ethics. And Libra is the Facebook coin, their cryptocurrency. And when that happened, then Congress was like, oh, we should talk about this. And they had a bunch of people come in. And you can also imagine if Libra has it, they're connected to 2 billion people. And so there are lots of societal impacts there. The other piece here is, this is a funny image that I took where a big desire of Bitcoin and Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies is to some extent, to take down centralized trusted intermediaries and institutions like banks and nation states. And if that does happen, what should that evolutionary process look like? So the other issue here with the current blockchain ethics ecosystem and why it's important right now is because it's not very big. So you can compare it to the AI ethics world. And 10 years ago, there was essentially $0 in AI ethics with 0 centers. But as you can tell here, these are a bunch of different centers around the world. There's hundreds of millions, or tens of millions, or hundreds of millions of dollars in annual funding with centers around the world. That compared to something like the blockchain ethics ecosystem, which doesn't have very many folks in it. There's a couple specific players. Most of these people are just, they're not really ethics focused, but they are essentially lobbyist groups in Congress, although they have some ethical components. You have this thing, Blockchain Trust Accelerator, which is kind of getting there. This thing, Open Money Initiative, which is thinking about how money is used in Venezuela and hyperinflationary countries, but we're really at it's essentially $0 in the blockchain ethics ecosystem, while we have 50 million or hundreds of millions of dollars in the AI ethics world. So when we start to think about when we start to think about, and goodbye, when we think about actually what blockchain ethics is, if we assume that it's now, yes, we think it's important. By the way, just actually let's check. Who, based off of my explanation there, this being, oh, this seems super important, this being like, I wasn't really convinced, it doesn't seem that important, where would you all fall giving me a thumb of like, oh, this is pretty important, or this is not that important? Okay, we got thumbs up. So, given that, let's talk about what it actually looks like. And I'm going to reference Albert's talk yesterday at the opening ceremony, which is blockchain is very complicated, and we are at the beginning of understanding it as a technology. So depending on how you look at it, you can view it from a bunch of different perspectives. And this is especially true for blockchain ethics. So we're going to kind of take a similar multi-perspective mindset here. So I like to think of it from these 3 big perspectives. There's the tech side of blockchain, and so the tech ethics piece. There's the money side of blockchain and cryptocurrency, so the money ethics piece, or the financial ethics piece. And then there's the institutional side, which is if you think of these blockchain and cryptocurrency networks as new kind of institutions in and of themselves, and new kind of networks, like something like Facebook or like something like Google, that have the power to motivate and coordinate people. We can also think about some institutional ethics as well. So, on the tech ethics side, the way that I think is right to think about it, let me check my time here. is so, as we know with blockchain technology, you can think of it as a new kind of database or a new kind of ledger. And if you do, you have this old kind, which is the centralized ledger, and you have this new kind, which is this distributed ledger, where everybody has a copy of the blockchain, and it's immutable. It's usually it's pseudonymous, so it has your public key out there. And when you have this distributed ledger, and you have that technical affordance, and when people say technical affordance, what they mean is like the abilities that the technology gives you. When you have that new technical affordance of this immutable distributed database, a societal good that comes up is this tension between privacy and security. So what I mean by that is pretty much for any database, whether it's Facebook's database or the Equifax database or any kind of database, you're gonna have issues around like, okay, if everybody's on this database, how can we make sure that that thing is super secure and like, that people can't access it in these ways? And how can we make sure that it's private, such that the data that is on it does not have like revealing personal information or things like that. And so that is one way to view this technology, and you can imagine something like Facebook's Libra. If you just connect Facebook Libra to all of the like Facebook system, you imagine all of our financial transactions in Facebook's hands, in addition to all of our like social media transactions, that could be an issue with privacy and security. Another way to view it is, still from this tech ethics perspective, is as a new internet protocol. So this is the internet protocol stack, which was built in the late 1900s, and you can view all of these were essentially ways to give and receive information, and in a kind of permissionless, trustless fashion. And you can, and here are like some of the companies that were built on it or whatever, but you can imagine Bitcoin and Ethereum as a new layer of the internet stack and a new internet protocol, but instead of for information, it's for value. And so now we can give and receive value. The technical affordance is we can give and receive value in this permissionless, trustless way through this protocol. And it will have, like the early internet, you can think of it as being like unstoppable code. And what they mean by that is, just like at the early internet, it's like, oh, you're going to be able to, on the early internet, give and receive like porn on the internet, give and receive, naughty words or things like that were able to be transmitted as bytes through this protocol. So too can you give and receive, censorship-resistant money like Bitcoin, or unstoppable code like smart contracts, if-then statements. That will be happening in this new world and is a technical affordance. Another way to think about it is this decentralization or disintermediation piece. And that affordance, I like to think of it as, so with the early internet, it was, what the internet was to information. It, decentralized and disintermediated these trusted centralized information things like media primarily, and so you get this decentralization and disintermediation where everybody now has their kind of personalized Facebook feeds or direct to them kind of Google search engines, and that decentralization and disintermediation will happen as well in the blockchain and cryptocurrency world, but instead of with information, it will happen now with value, where you will be able to have these weird new pockets, and you can start to see them exist, of networks of value start to be created. So with that as an affordance, this new internet protocol, some of the societal goods that you are worried about here are just making sure you still have humans in the loop. So it's nice that we can be more efficient and send things in this through a protocol in this permissionless, trustless way with unstoppable code, but at the same time, if you have unstoppable code that allows terrorist financing to give somebody, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, it's like, maybe we want humans to be part of that loop to some extent. And so that's one kind of classic issue that, again, maps from the internet onto blockchain crypto. Another one is coherence. So the idea here is that, and this is very connected to the decentralization piece, where you have, with the internet as it now exists, you have these new kind of trust ecosystems where people believe in whatever their like current Facebook feed is telling them, or they believe, whatever their Twitter feed is telling them, and you have a lot less coherence and a lot less clear stories for society, which is both good and bad. But we expect a similar thing to happen in the blockchain and cryptocurrency world, where you're like, okay, there are all these tokens. It used to be simple when there was just like US dollars, and then also if you went to another country, you use their money. But now you have a lot less coherence around what is valuable and what is money. So that's when you take blockchain ethics and think of it from a tech ethics lens. That's what this looks like. Now you can think of it also from a money ethics lens, or a financial ethics lens. And hello. And by the way, just to let you know, we're talking about blockchain ethics and viewing it from these three lenses. So we just talked about it from the tech ethics lens, and now we're going to view it from the money ethics lens. So if we think of it as money ethics, yeah, there's been an evolution of money over time, and now we have cryptocurrency, and it's cool. And so when you have this affordance of money, this new kind of money, the societal good, and this one's a little bit more complicated, but generally you're trying to protect investors or consumers, trying to protect investors and consumers with what happens to their money. And so we have a bunch of different, in the United States, we have a bunch of different in those government regulatory bodies that help with this, like the SEC or the CFTC or FinCEN, and like the SEC does securities, the CFTC does commodities, FinCEN does money. And so depending on how you think of cryptocurrencies, and you can think of it as any of those things, you kind of have different regulatory laws here. And the real tension in societal good that we're pushing for here is on one side we want the liberty of being able to say, hey everybody, anybody can have access to these new markets. Anybody can get access to these ICOs. That's cool. We don't need to be an accredited investor to invest. But if you have that, then people's incentives, then you have this permissionless system where anybody can access it, and you have things like scams and things of that variety that are have no consumer protection around them. So that can be an issue. And another classic issue too is if you have these new kind of frictionless systems built around liberty, then you might not get very much equality. So this is with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, the income inequality or the Gini coefficient in all of these systems with Bitcoin and Ethereum is worse than all nation states for all intents and purposes. So that's, when you think of it as money, those are some issues that come into play. When you think of it as incentives, that's another, some other issues come into play. And what I mean by incentives are, because this stuff is money, then it will incentivize people to do something. And when it does that, so any a clear societal good here is a healthy environment, and I just mean the mining system with cryptocurrency. So you can imagine it as, hey world, we're going to put this white paper on the internet, 2008, post the code in 2009, and before you know it, 10 years later, you have these massive server farms all around the world that are spending about 1/2000th or about 1/500th rather of the world electricity just to mine Bitcoin, and that is crazy, and that's a result of these incentives, just saying that you can turn electricity into money, and then people are like, oh shit, I'm going to do that, and obviously as an externality of that, then you have these environmental issues. So this is to say that when you think from an incentives perspective, incentivizing people to do things is very, very powerful, and that can have negative externalities like the environment, and there are also some other things that we don't need to go too deep into of ways that you can be good or bad with game theory to be mean to people with these incentives. So that's blockchain ethics as money ethics. Let's finally talk about blockchain ethics as institutional ethics. So by institutions, I mean, so when people talk about institutions, they're talking about things like religions, and all these things are things that can motivate and coordinate people. And this is connected to this guy, Coase, who has this Coase theorem of, why does the market exist versus why does the state exist? Why aren't they just the same thing or not? And it's because each thing there is better or worse, each institution is better or worse at organizing people, either motivating them for things or coordinating them for things. Like the market is super good at motivating. It's like, hey, everybody, let's go, and like people are down to do things, but it's not very good at coordinating. The market's not that good at a coordinating mechanism, versus something like a state, which is better at coordinating people, but is less good at motivating people. So we have these institutions, big things like religions or nation states or companies, or recently, this is an interesting one. What's up, Dan? This is a recent one of these new internet platforms. So you have a new kind of institution, which are these internet-enabled platforms, like especially Google, Amazon, and Facebook, that connect people over the internet through this new trusted way. Stuff like sharing economy, Uber, Airbnb, etc. fall into this bucket. So this is our new institution that we've seen recently, and now we're seeing some of these new blockchain and cryptocurrency networks as institutions in and of themselves that can motivate and coordinate people. And so when you have these new institutions, the big issue is essentially stability, like societal stability. And the tension here is this tension between evolution and revolution. So you can imagine most of the blockchain and cryptocurrency world wants to exit the current system by creating a new revolution over here. And if they do so, that is exciting. I'm generally bullish on that and think it will be good. But if that happens and like nation states go down or banks go down, it's like we want to make sure we do this in a way that is more evolutionary than like revolutionary and like less fragile for society. And as an example of this, you can see this happening with like Google, Amazon, and Facebook. When they had more of a move fast and break things mindset, what that meant is that our sense making as a society went down in a big way. Some things like Amazon and what it did to a bunch of small and medium businesses, they got hit by this in a big way. So there's things that you can kind of map from this internet world where you're like, ooh, that was more kind of a revolution vibe than an evolution vibe, so we should watch out. Yeah, so that's kind of the third big way to view it. And Dan, just to get you up to speed here, we were talking about the three big ways to view blockchain ethics, either as tech ethics, as money ethics, or as institutional ethics. So, yeah, I mean, for those of us who are hacking here, I think that really I don't have too many pieces of advice for you. I mainly have this, what's called the Collingridge dilemma, which states, when change is easy, the need for it cannot be foreseen. When the need for change is apparent, changes become expensive, difficult, and time-consuming. And this is to say that, like, right now you're at the beginning of your, like, this weekend, you shouldn't really be worrying about, like, the ethical implications of, like, the technology you're going to build. It's not going to be too big of a deal. But as these things happen over time, you should think about, things like the trust assumptions that are baked into your system, what your system is incentivizing people to do, what is the security of your system, all these things that we chat about in those last big 3 slides. Start to think about them as you hack today, and make sure that you're not creating something that long-term, if it continues to propagate, could have negative impacts. I want to say one final piece here, though, which is the one thing that almost all of us, I bet, could do, which is connecting blockchain ethics to abundance. So it's kind of a more macro take, but I think it's pretty important. So the idea here is that us as society have gone through these shifts from scarcity to abundance. And at the beginning, in the agricultural revolution, and 12,000 years ago, food was the scarce thing. But then we're like, oh snap, we know how to make farms, this is sweet. Then food no longer became scarce, and land became the scarce thing, because land is what you needed to make all the food. After that, in the Industrial Revolution, land was primarily the scarce thing, but we were able to start to create these factories and machine shops and things like that. And that may be the case that like the land itself wasn't as important, but rather like the machines and the capital were the super important thing. And so that's kind of what we've been based around our main scarcity constrained society recently. But the shift that I claim is making now, and that other folks claim is happening, is that we are starting to be in the case where essentially we have enough for ourselves from a money perspective, for society. It's more of like a distribution problem than it is a production problem. And then eventually we'll shift to this attention piece, attention as the main scarce thing in society. But as we move to this world of abundant capital, we have a lot of power, us in this room. So as you can see here, in this is a graph for the last 200 years of the number of people who live in extreme poverty. 200 years ago, essentially 90% of people, everybody was super poor, no one had washing machines or like TVs or computers or any of that stuff. Half of kids used to die before the age of 5. Now it is 10%, so a lot less people live in extreme poverty, which is great. It's still about 750 million, which is awful. But we are much closer to abundance. Or from like an individual, instead of a macro perspective, you can look from an individual perspective. And this is a graph. X-axis is individual income, and it's a log scale, by the way, so this doubles each time. And the y-axis is how happy you are, essentially, across these 4 different kind of metrics that people are measuring. And if you look at it, it's like, oh man, right around $45,000 per year, you don't really, it's already diminishing to that point. It gets even, it essentially flatlines there. So it's like, you don't get that much happier after you make money after $45,000 a year. So what this means is that I self-tax myself, and I'm super transparent about it. So I make $70,000 a year. Of that, about $20,000 is taxed to the government. Thank you, government. And then of the remaining $50,000, I self-tax myself 20% of it, or about $10,000, and give to a variety of random charities and things, a lot of which can have a lot of impact. And I'm also very transparent with my the amount of money I have. So I literally took these pictures right before I made this talk. So my amount of Bitcoin and ETH has gone up recently, so I feel good about that. And I have $5,000 in my bank account. So this is just a note to all of us here to really, as you move, there's like what you're doing with like your technology, and then there's also taking a step back and realizing you're placing the macro picture of things and saying, do I really need all that is coming into me, or can I let some of that money flow through me back to others in the system? So with that, if you want to learn more, you can go to blockchainethics.co. There's a really big syllabus there and a forum that you can join. Feel free to like ping me at Rhys Lindmark or anything of that variety as well. And thank you so much. And does anybody have, I think we have like maybe, we could take like 2 questions, I would say. See if you have any thoughts or questions.
Aside from, that link and you, and the few names that kind of vaguely have ethics, do you see any groundswell to start anything bigger? Or are you creating that groundswell?
To some extent, I am part of creating that groundswell. I think that there are a lot of, the weird thing within the blockchain and cryptocurrency world is that a lot of folks have this mindset baked in, because it's kind of a rejection of the Web 2.0 world and surveillance capitalism and the banking state and those things. So I think to some extent there's everything here is the groundswell, and I would say there's not really. I would look at OMI, the Open Money Initiative, that's very specifically about understanding how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are used in nation states that have hyperinflation. So I think that's the best one, and the other one is Coin Center. Although they're technically a lobbying organization, pretty much, they are very knowledgeable about all the money ethics side of things and how that works.
That's awesome. I think you're right. I think it is very baked in. I know as we started our firm, we created our values initially that had the ethics baked in because it was so important to us. So, but it would be nice to see more explicit work. So that's cool.
I agree.
Thanks.
Thank you. We have one more question. Yes.
So I'll lob this as kind of a softball, and feel free to follow up afterwards. So should a good project be a valid reason to effectively launder bad money? With the current presidential election going on, there's some attention on Biden, for example, accepting money from oil executives to fund his campaign. And I've got a note that you're with the Digital Currency Initiative out of the Media Lab, so Joe Ito has secured funding for you. So potentially some of that money in your account comes from Mr. Epstein, right?
Yes.
So that's currently a discussion right now around your center, and I know you're aware of that. So what are your thoughts on, is it okay for us to burn so much electricity to get Bitcoin and these networks off the ground for the potential value that they could provide. Is that equivalent to the moral cost of getting it bootstrapped? MIT does so many good things, Media Lab does so many good things. Is it acceptable to use tainted money to fund good projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so just for everybody else who just came in the room, we're talking about blockchain ethics and wondering how one can use tainted money, or how should we think about using bad money, dirty money for good things?
There's no good answer to that
I would say,
question.
so I come from two mindsets here. One is a consequentialist mindset or utilitarian mindset, which is to say, hey, if you, this money is going to go somewhere, and so you can think counterfactually and say, oh, it could either go to this thing over here, or, if you imagine somebody with dirty money sends it super anonymously to just give to really, really poor people through Give Directly, that seems good.
Who knows? Maybe Epstein was behind the pineapple fund.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say that, or you can think of it from a deontological or virtue ethics perspective, where you say, hey, the most important thing here is that people are being honest about themselves, they're being transparent, and from that perspective, you may be less okay with what's happening. So that's my take. Okay, thank you.